Hello, everybody. Welcome to GCRE TV. Today, we have Glenn on the Mobile Home Park Show, where we're going to be discussing the different types of utilities and infrastructure that is on a mobile home park and for you to consider when looking at investing in a mobile home park. Glenn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Gavin. I hope you are too.
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. The weather here has changed a little bit, so there's no fall anymore. It went straight from summer straight into winter,
Great the winter,
but it's
huh?
pretty good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It's
Glenn,
beautiful here. It's beautiful here. It's like the perfect weather. It's perfect.
I envy you, man. You should just send some of that lovely weather back here to
Right?
Switzerland.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. So, Glenn, today we're going to talk about the different types of utilities and infrastructure that we have in a mobile home park, and for people to consider. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting topic. I got my pen and paper as always every week, ready to learn from you. So, I would put the show on to you now, and I
All right.
will let's sit back in the meantime.
All right. Well, I'll try not to bore you guys to death with this because it's a little dry. I'll just be straight up with you. But it's absolutely critical for you guys to understand about the infrastructure when looking at a park for purchase, or if you're contemplating a sale of your park, understanding exactly what your infrastructure is and how to explain it to your buyers so it doesn't freak them out and cause them to either not offer or cause them to offer less. And as a buyer, infrastructure, it could be a massive pain in your butt if you didn't look deep enough into it. It could be very expensive to replace some of these systems, and it can just be a lot of headaches. And obviously, if you have a defective system, you're going to want to know about that so you can adjust your pricing accordingly if it hasn't already been adjusted by the seller or the broker who you might be buying the part from. So, we'll get into it right now. The easiest systems out there, not necessarily the best systems, mind you, but the easiest systems that most buyers initially want to take a run at when looking at parks is what we refer to as public water and sewer directly billed to the tenant. That sounds, maybe a little complicated, but basically you have two types of systems out there, right? Both when you look at them from a gross level. You have public systems and you have private systems. The public systems are owned by a municipality, or maybe it's a private vendor but working as a municipality. Okay. The private systems are the ones that's solely on the owner of the park to operate and test and maintain and provide. And it's often something like a well water, which in some parts of the world is totally reasonable, and in some parts of America is almost unheard of. So you have to be comfortable with that. So with public systems, it's municipality. The municipality is providing it 99% of the time. And then on the private side, you have anything from well systems to septic systems to wastewater treatment plants to water treatment plants to the list goes on and on. And so you can kind of get a little over your skis when evaluating these things, being like, I don't know what I don't know. So how am I supposed to understand what a sewage treatment plant is? Because that sounds terrifying. And it might be to you, it might not be, but for most beginner buyers, first time buyers into this space that don't have much experience with operating commercial properties on private utilities, most of those guys are going to end up looking for public water, public sewer, directly billed to the tenant, and ideally the municipality owning the water lines even inside the parcel all the way up to the meter that's in front of the tenant's home. Now, from there, that would be, for lack of a better phrase, the creme de la creme type of situation where you have directly billed utilities, directly paid by the tenant. You have no involvement. The municipality owns the water and sewer lines all the way up to the meter or to the home. Okay. Doesn't happen too often, although it happens often enough. So, we sell tons of those. Remember, those are going to be more expensive just because there's less headache and more interest in there. So supply demand curve, right? And then value and headache and time kind of all balanced out, right? So from there, you sticking with public utilities, Then what we're going to get down to is the direct build, but now you own, the park owner or the new buyer who's buying the park, owns or will own that infrastructure coming from the city's main line in their main road in front of your parcel, all the way through your parcel to supplying the tenants, whether it's metered or not metered. We'll talk about that too. So if you own the water lines or the sewer lines, and you are responsible for charging the tenant or providing the tenant water, whether you're billing it back or providing it for free, either situation is totally fine depending on what you're trying to do. But now you own those utility lines, and that could be a real bear. That could be a real bear. The water lines can be made of multiple different types of materials that have their own special grading level of what's preferred to what's not preferred. And same with the sewer lines, okay? But starting first here with the water side of things, back in the day, when some of these older parks were being built, it was just, the cheapest materials possible to provide the water, the pressurized water to get to the tenants' units. They may have been in some kind of plastic piping. They may have been galvanized steel. They may have been, PVC. They may have been CPVC. They could have been, this, that, or the other. So a lot of different type of systems going in there. Nowadays, the preferred system is PEX, okay, PEX tubing. It's extremely cost effective. It has a really long life. It tends not to get punctures like stainless steel or galvanized steel might, and the couplings tend not to leak nearly as often, and they can resist a colder temperature. So PEX is a great system to put in. If you're looking at replacing your system, I would highly advise only looking at PEX, to replace your system. Don't put in that galvanized stuff. You'll regret it instantly. Same with most of the other type of materials that are used. PVC is still a perfectly reasonable thing to use. Just make sure all your seals are done well. Make sure you've got it buried proper and all that stuff, because it will freeze and it will break, and it's a real pain in the butt. And especially when you get to underneath the trailers, which in almost all cases, that's on the tenant or the landlord to take care of. Even when the municipality owns the water lines, they typically only own the water lines up to the meter, and then from the section from the meter to the manufactured home and underneath it, running to all the different toilets and sinks and things. That's almost always the landlord when they own the home. That's responsible for those, and sometimes the tenant is responsible for them when they own the home and it's attached to the home. Oftentimes, the landlord would still be responsible from the meter to where it comes back above ground underneath the home. Confused yet? I know it gets complicated, but this is the stuff you have to watch out for when looking at these things. These are the questions you need to know to ask. So getting really deep with the types of systems that are there are only going to help you, whether it's going to help you figure out you don't want the deal or help you figure out that maybe you can stretch a little further in your price to be more competitive. You got to understand these things. So going back now to the last subject was where we own the water lines and it's public water. Now let's jump over to where we own the water, where we own the sewer lines, okay? And we're responsible for all repairs and things like that. Now the tenant's almost never responsible for the sewer lines. Generally anything, from below the house to the septic tanks and beyond are usually the landlord. Now some landlords will put in some contracts that, hey, if I go and fix your line and I pull out a G.I. Joe that your kid stuffed in the toilet, that's on you, not on the landlord. So some caveats there. But more importantly is understanding what the septic lines, are made of, understanding what kind of septic system it is, because man, it goes far out from here. I mean, you have your standard type of septic system, one septic tank, one drain field, one unit. Okay, that's pretty clean and easy. I personally have that on my farm. Where I have my one house. I have my sewer lines going from my house to a septic tank. And then I have the 2-tank system that then feeds out into my drain fields that then gives me really green grass in that part of my yard. And so that's easy. I've never had to do anything with it in the 20-something years I've owned that farm. I've never had to do anything with it except provide some biological kind of chemical thing that you put in there to keep all the good organisms alive that help it, dissipate better. But not at parks. That doesn't tend to happen. Most of the time, these septic systems have been neglected. Okay, and oftentimes you're dealing with having to pump these septic tanks pretty regularly. And I'll tell you, if you're pumping your septic tank more than once every year or two, you definitely got something going on that shouldn't be going on. So you want to ask your other party in the deal about what type of maintenance they've been doing on those septic lines, if they're using a biological agent to help keep it nice and clear, or how often they're having a septic failure or a septic pump. Nice thing about septic, though, if it's just a straight basic system, in most parts of the country, from a top to bottom single unit type of septic system, even if you had to replace all of it, it's only a few $1,000s, maybe 10,000 in some states, but as low as 3,000 here in the South. So it's really not that expensive or prohibitive on a one-time basis thing. Whereas if you have other types of systems, it could be much more. So in a lot of parks, what you'll run into is that you have a shared septic system, meaning more than one unit is using that septic system. Okay, and that might be fine. Sometimes it's actually very efficient and a good thing to use, because you kind of compiled your drain fields and your tanks. It uses up less land overall, and you have one area of repair that might not be so bad. But when you start attaching multiple units to it, it's possible that you could have multiple units go down, and you're going to not enjoy the process of not getting paid on those units while the process is down, and bringing them back online and having the city argue with you. At least with one septic, you're kind of limited to a one potential loss of space, whereas in some parks you might have 5 or 6 or 7 units attached to one septic. That's a lot of revenue to lose, but also still pretty simple to deal with. You want to know what kind of lines are being used in the septic. Now that sounds confusing, right? Like, well, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well, just like your water lines, you have this kind of hodgepodge of available materials. Same thing with sewer. However, up until the mid 70s, and I could be off by a few years, so don't call me out on it, but up into the 70s or so, a lot of septic systems that went in were done with what's called Orangeburg clay, or sometimes just referred to as clay sewer lines. That is kind of scary, okay? Because those, really don't have much resistance to impact, okay? So if a car drives across the yard right over it, okay, even though it's a couple feet underground, it still can crush that sewer line. And that clay is as brittle as it gets. I mean, you just look at it wrong and it could fall apart on you. Plus, they weren't meant for extended life. It's amazing some of these clay systems are still in place that are 50 years old and still working, mind you. But at some point, you're going to have to replace them. And again, the preferred type of materials is a high-end PVC, like a PEX or a PVC, and you can run these bigger sewer lines through your yard. They can handle tree roots and crushing, much better. They have much less impact. But all these kind of things need to play out when you're looking at, septic systems here. Is what kind of lines are under the ground? Are they, PVC? Are they clay? Or are they some other material? How many systems are attached to this one septic system? And understanding about, the actual tank itself. How big is that tank? Is it a tiny one that's only 750 gallons? Is it a huge one that's 5,000 gallons or something in between? You want to know all these things when going through your due diligence. And you want to be able to explain to a buyer, if you're a park owner, what these are, because that's the stuff that's going to jam them up and make them kill the deal 2-3 months into the due diligence process. Moving past there, it gets even more complicated, because now you might have a tank system, a septic system-ish type of thing, that then goes to a mound system. Okay, and a mound system, like, that sounds terrifying. What is that? That's actually like it's a great system, and it works very well in the areas that you can't perk your ground where you get the proper where the effluent properly flows through the ground and filters back down, and cleans itself. A lot of places you can't perk. So an alternative to a septic system then is what's called mound system. And a mound is basically kind of what it sounds like, and it's going to kind of gross you out when you hear about it, but understand it's a good system. It's basically a pile of dirt thrown in a giant mound on top of the existing ground that's there. So you're making kind of a large heap of a pile, and it's got tubes running through it, and you usually have some pumps between the septic tank and the mound that's pushing the effluent into that mound and giving it the space to drain into your ground system clean. So kind of sounds kind of bad, but it's an alternative. We're closing on a park this week with a mound system, and it took a lot of buyers getting used to understanding what that is. But they're actually kind of high tech nowadays and fairly inexpensive, to put in. The park we're selling is about 70 units. There's a 3-mound system there, and to do that system, it wasn't an atrocious amount of money, and it kept the park being able to operate and be a nice park. And of course, you can put those pretty far out back, and you can put landscaping on them and kind of hide them. It's not just like a big mound of poo just sitting there, just in case if you were wondering. Then from there, from there or with there, these pumps that I mentioned, those could also be very expensive and complicated. So if you have a park that the owner says, oh yeah, I got a couple sewer pumps, no big deal, kind of a big deal actually. Now you got to find out what kind of sewer pumps, how many sewer pumps, what sections of the park is this sewer pump for, is that sewer pump for, where does it connect and go to? Obviously the maintenance on these things, you want to see the maintenance logs. A lot of these sewer pumps don't last for an eternity. Okay, most of them, are going to last somewhere 7 years-ish, 5 to 10 years-ish. Okay, so you're going to want to know that, and they're not cheap. They're typically thousands of dollars to replace. And when they get stuck or clogged, you actually got to stick your hand in there and clear out the clog, and that might not be your favorite job to do. And you got to know these things, because if it's a critical element to your park operating and it goes down, the city's not going to take long to hear about it and come, razzle you a little bit, and you might have to shut down until you fix the thing. So these are all things you have to understand, because you don't want to get caught in a situation where you're not able to help your tenants disperse of their effluent. That's the thing the tenants won't put up with at all. They will absolutely call the city and say, hey, we have health problems here, health code issues, and they're going to come down and mess with you a little bit until it's clear. So going from, we talked about septic, and then we talked about mounds. From there, there's a few other variations of this, but then the next general kind of big thing that you'll see fairly often in the system is a sewage treatment plant. That sounds very scary for most people. It's, it almost sounds like, a $1 million type of thing that is all this fancy stuff, and you have to have, people aren't going to want to see it. Well, in most cases, it's not like that, although it could easily be $1 million. The systems are generally in the back of a park somewhere, or at least hidden by, some fencing or landscaping. And it's kind of what you're thinking of, like when you drive by the municipal sewer system and you see these giant things out there. Well, it's like that, but kind of compressed into an appropriate size for your park. And basically it handles all the effluent, cleans it up, and then sends it back out, usually into a creek or something like that. I know it's crazy, but that's actually how they do it. And it's totally legal. But by the time it gets to the creek, they say it's as clean as it can be. I'm not drinking it, so I don't know, but I would suggest researching these things. They're actually pretty cool and a very efficient system. And in areas that have extremely high tap fees to connect to city sewer, or in areas where you can't have any other type of septic system, these are a great solution. And they'll keep you in business. And, in some deals, the operator will get himself a license as a municipality, and then you'll provide that service to the surrounding, area around their park for other people to have an option that, competes with whatever else they might be using. Not something I necessarily recommend, but there are definitely things that are being done as we speak. We're selling a park right now that has something like that. And these are good systems, but when they fail, it's a problem. Okay, it's a real problem when they fail, and the city will shut you down. You have to get tested. In some places, very, very frequently. Daily, weekly, monthly. Most places is monthly or quarterly, and you have to have a licensed operator operating this thing, and you have to have a licensed person testing this thing, and you got to send in the results, and you got to make the adjustments accordingly. So you're using some chemicals and things like that, and that's almost a full-time job for somebody in a big park is operating these things. And there's not a lot, but there's third-party services that can do that for you. And everybody's got their own weird deals they strike with them. And about the sewage treatment plants, I'm not even going to try and get that deep into there to explain to you the different types of sewage treatment plants. Just understand that a treatment plant is not a bad option. Okay, it gets a lot of bad press, but it's really not a bad option. And almost every major operator who has any substantial amount of parks has a treatment plant in their system. So it's really not that bad when you think of it from that angle. From there's other system for the effluent that's referred to as a lagoon. And probably all of you have seen this at some time in your life. You just didn't know what it was. But typically it has like a big lake, like a pond, okay, where all of the effluent is going into this big pond, and it's being treated with chemicals and sunlight and all this kind of stuff to clean the effluent as the physical substance kind of sinks to the bottom and biodegrades, and then the rest of it gets purified through this, that, or the other processes that they use. And again, it tends to eventually get moved into a creek somewhere as the clean water is done, or it gets evaporated and it gets recycled through that way. So that's a system I'm not excited about at a park when I see it as a broker. That has hands down the most complications. And as a new buyer, I would not recommend, buying a lagoon park the first time you're looking at them. A sewage treatment plant, I would say maybe, you'll usually get a better value on yield because of, there's a little bit more headache there, and a little less desire. But the lagoons, not too many major operators have lagoons. Okay, there's some, but not too many. And they typically still are like, oh, we have a lagoon, and it's a pain in our butts and things like that. So from there, we have at least that many type of sewer systems, okay, from the private side. The public side, it's the municipality. Who cares from that point where it goes and how it's dealt with? You guys can Google that if you're curious. But you do want to know, even if the city, even if it's municipal, what the sewer lines are made of, who's responsible for the repairs, things like that. You want to always check, how these lines on a park that are coming from the trailer over to the city sewer line that usually runs in your road along the park or something. You want to check what I refer to. I'm not sure it's the exact right, name for it or vernacular for it, but we refer to them as the tiles that connect the sewage from the 10-inch unit to the main pipeline. You want to check to see what that is. Oftentimes they're made out of a terracotta, and if you own the utility line inside of the park, even though it's a municipal line, you'd be responsible for the wear and tear and the leakage on it. And those tiles can get very expensive to replace. And you want to know this, and there's great ways to check on this. Most of the third-party plumber type of people, they'll do an inspection for you if you give them a few bucks, and they'll run a camera down and inspect this, that, or the other. With the water lines, they'll throw in usually some dyes into the water lines and see where it surfaces. Okay, so you can kind of get an idea where the leaks are. But on the going back to the water side, we talked about the materials, but we talked about it being public. Now, if the water is a well, okay, which is totally common. My farm, again, we use a well. I got a well for decades and decades. Not a big deal. We got good clean water, and I don't think twice about it. But I don't provide it to anybody. And in almost every case, you're going to have to test out water if you're providing it to other tenants. not necessarily because you're legally obligated to, which is crazy. Usually the smaller parks, at least in the South, under 30 units, they often don't get tested at all, which I just find just insane. But if you're a park owner providing water to your tenants, just out of good morality, you should be testing your water, making sure it's, not going to make them sick, because that's a liability you don't want. That's any kind of issue you don't want, is getting your tenants sick from your water supply. So when you're looking at a well can last forever and cost you damn near nothing, okay, which is an absolute great thing to have. And if you're like some other people, you might want to go get licensed as a municipality so you can make some money on that water when you charge it to your tenants. Totally reasonable thing to do, again, but then you'll have to start testing once you get turned into a municipality. But you want to kind of understand the pump that, brings the water up. How old is that pump? How much does it cost to replace? Is there enough water in that well to cover everything that's in the park during high usage? And, even better is if there's vacant lots or an expansion area, is there enough water in this well to provide the expansion area? Things that you need to know, because just because it can be expanded, but your well can only support, or your sewage system can only support, X amount of usage, well, then you might not ever be able to expand this thing. So these are important things to kind of consider. I feel like there might be a few other things out there, but guys, I don't know what else to tell you about them. I would absolutely say that I'm happy to walk you through it anytime you're reviewing a system. We didn't get into talking about electric systems. And I would just say for 99% of you, do not, and dealing with mobile home park, do not buy an electric system that is a private system that you own and operate and are responsible for the repairs, and probably not buy a public system that you are master metered and having to deal with that. You're responsible for all those lines. Yeah, it's okay sometimes. It's nuts, and most buyers aren't going to want that type of system. So we can save that for another time to talk about. If anybody wants to hit me up directly, I'm happy to walk you through sort of what to look out for on an electric system. But your two basic systems with water and sewer, I hope I covered enough ground for you guys to at least, understand the ins and outs from a loose level. And if you need deeper information on it, I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction.
Cool. Thank you very much for that, Glenn. A lot of talk today about the utilities, especially the sewer and the septic systems, to understand. Which Jess, I've made some notes as always. I'll run through these with you. So I think for everybody who's watching, they need to be able to understand that there's different types of sewer septic utilities. That's correct, and they should know which one is actually installed in the park when they're actually looking to purchase it. The other thing that you mentioned was the maintenance program that they have on those utility services. When was it installed? When was it last checked? Is it due for renewal? Because once these things go horrible, it could be a huge costly exercise for anybody that's looking in. The other thing I picked up on, which I actually didn't know, you talked about clay lines, which I would always assume, and I'm sure most people who are looking at this is always going to assume that most sewer systems have a PVC piping system.
No.
But from what you were saying, there's clay lines, and I could only imagine what would go horrible. Imagine that bursting on you in the middle of the night or something, what it's going to cause. So really, you don't want to park with a clay line. You want the PVC, which is a more up-to-date and modern way of it as well. So you want to know that as well. Understanding the life cycle of the utilities is really important, because it could be a really costly exercise, when budgeting, because if something happens in the future and you don't have the budget, or you never budgeted for you because you didn't understand at what age of that sewer system or utility system were when you were purchasing that park, and you don't forecast for it out, you'll probably be heavily out of pocket. So that's something for you guys to look at when you're there, for sure. The other thing is the city or the municipality will always have a hand in your utility and sewer septic services, and they will be policing this very closely, probably almost on a monthly basis, especially if you're a new operator or they're not known to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the bigger cities, they're more on top of it. In the tertiary markets, if they're bored, they're on top of it, but usually they're not going to come bother you about it until somebody bothers them about it.
Right.
Or if you're a new guy in the town, then maybe they come and bother you a lot about it because they want you connect to the city sewer. That's what they did to me at my park. Was I was a new guy in town. The recession came. Everybody's getting hammered. The city's like, how do we make more money? They said, oh, we'll expand our sewer system and force everybody. We'll expand our city limits, force everybody to connect to the utility system.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I was out of pocket $100,000. And that was like due now. And I had to do all the manual labor myself to connect it to there, because that would have cost me another $150,000. So, I had to go buy, rent a tractor and learn how to connect to a city sewer myself in the time frame given, which wasn't a lot of time to connect 30 something units. They love to do that to the new guy that comes to the town who doesn't know no better. Now, you could argue with them and get an attorney and spend all this money, but you're still spending money. It's still a headache. And at the end of the day, they're still going to make you connect. So understanding these things going into it up front is critically important on your due diligence stuff. I didn't know to ask any of those questions, 20 years ago when I bought my park. That was one of the costliest things I didn't ask about, because I had clay lines. I had all these things. And it was like, oh, crap. Once it got in, the municipalities won't take no guff. Like if they hear that something's afoul, they're going to come, rattle your cage about it.
Definitely. And you don't want them shutting you down, period.
No,
because then you're going to lose revenue.
Yeah. And when they shut you down, now you have to deal with putting these tenants up somewhere, because that's an expensive proposition, So,
you have to put them up in a hotel or something, right?
Until that's fixed. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And then you mentioned the Lagoon system, or the Lagoon system is not a good choice for anybody who's now starting off in the mobile home park world. It's too much red tape around it with the municipality, if I'm correct in quoting you there. And the maintenance and repair of it, if it goes wrong, could be very, very expensive.
And it's unsightly most of the time, because when you see a big pond in the middle of a park and it's covered in green algae and it's kind of like fenced off, you just know that that's a pond full of poop. And, it's not necessarily what you're trying, to visualize when you're having, dinner with your friends at your house. And it's, what you're looking at. Oftentimes they're removed and pushed, somewhere else, but sometimes they're not. And, they do emit an odor. No matter what people say, you can still kind of smell that odor a little bit. And, they have such a hard time selling that your exit, is considerably harder. Your pricing is considerably less aggressive, and the buyer pool is much smaller, and the banks that will finance it are much fewer, and this and that and the other. And it becomes like, I don't know why you would buy this unless if you're knowing that the city has a connection available for you to bring it to city connection. Then that's actually a very good purchase, because if you can get rid of the lagoon and tie into city water, now all of a sudden you've just added some massive value to your park. You've compressed your cap rate, and you're going to get a better price on your exit. The other thing with lagoons is oftentimes, as crazy as it is, you'll find that they're in flood zones. That's a bad idea. Same with septic and all this other stuff. When they're in flood zones, it can be a bad idea. Very bad idea, because the water lifts everything up, and it spreads it out. So you want to be very careful when looking at private systems in a flood zone as well. I didn't mention that earlier, but that's something you have to pay very close attention to.
Yeah, I would imagine with especially in the south with so many hurricanes coming in now, more and more every year, that can rise. I know I was in Houston, Texas, but KT side of it. When Harvey passed through there, it was chaos for my friends and them who were actually living on a home park. So that's
terrible. It's terrible when that happened. Yeah.
So, Glenn, you're the guy in the know-how when it comes to mobile home park. Now is supposed to be the best time to invest, right? What's your opinion on investing right now in mobile home parks? I know you're quite crazy with deals right now all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, the age-old adage stands. Best time to invest in real estate was 20 years ago. The next best time is today, Yeah. And, our industry, manufactured housing industry, is the most resilient. We're not the sexiest by any means, like owning a beautiful hotel in some downtown somewhere, way sexier, right? But we're consistent, we're resilient, and we have yield. And when times get tough out there like they are right now for people start downsizing. Okay. And you're always going to need a place to live. I mean, that's just part of the hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
And so if you're limited to X amount of dollars, well, it doesn't get any more affordable than the manufactured housing. And even if the time starts just going crazy again, well, this is still a great industry. It's still an immaculate industry. I mean, the last 5 years, we've had just skyrocketing growth and pricing and values and all that, and cash flow is all just going through the roof right now for people. But the true test of any business is, did you make it through the recession? Were you able to grow through the recession? Were you able to expand this, that, or the other? And in manufactured housing, we do that. During the Great Recession, we gained occupancy and grew in rent growth. Okay. During COVID, our collections, for the most part, are pre-COVID levels, on what tenants are paying. Compare that to apartments and some other things, it's a different story. So the resiliency, to me, for somebody who's fairly risk adverse in investments, makes this still be a great time. Then couple in the fact that there's a lot of consolidation happening in our industry, right? There's only a finite amount of parks, like 50,000, and only about 20-something thousand of them will ever be sold on the investment kind of side of things. And so the buying groups just keep getting bigger and consolidating this industry, because right now it's like the age of the syndicator, okay, the consolidator, the aggregator. That's the guy right now who's trying to buy, 100 parks in the next, 5-10 years to package them up to the next guy. And they're making a lot of money right now. And that's happening day in and day out. So I don't think it's going to get much better in the future as far as, buying into this industry. I would say the time is now. It was yesterday, and tomorrow will be yesterday, but the time is now,
Yeah. So any last words on the sewer system, septic, utilities, infrastructure program for today?
If you go that route and look at these things, make sure you get some third-party people to review it. Make sure you're paying somebody who knows these systems to come out and review them. Also, you definitely want to make sure excuse me, you want to make sure what your options are with an ability to connect to a city system, because that's a great value add. It's very costly, but it's a great value add. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Glenn, it's always nice speaking to you. Any last minute words for how they can get in contact with you?
Guys, you can reach out to me anytime. Go to the mhpexpert.com to get our contact information. If you want to see deals that we have available, go to estersonmhcteam.com and reach out to us. We answer every call. We return every email. You don't have to use us as a broker. You don't have to pay us. We're here to be a free resource and provide just the best advisory that we can. So don't be a stranger.
Cool. All right, Glenn, it was nice talking to you as always, and I look forward to doing the show again next week with you, where we will be on actually episode 5. I can't believe we're on episode 5 already.
Time keeps ticking. I tell you.
Keeps going. All right, Glenn. Well, it's a pleasure having you again on the show, and I'll speak to you soon.
All right, Kevin. Thank you so much for talking to you again.
Bye.